What is up, everybody? Today, I am thrilled to introduce not only a friend of mine and my family, but also someone who has one of the most pragmatic solutions to one of the most pressing issues that we keep hearing about today. And in fact, this Monday, I actually released a Waking Infinity news segment about food shortages. So Todd Vincent is a regenerative farmer. He's currently with Ancient Nutrition alongside Jordan Rubin. And he has wisdom, Todd does, that blows me away every single time I speak with him. And his wisdom is lived experience. It's not just from the books. So his lived experience is by working with the animals, the plants on his farm and with his children, and reverent focus on the health of the microbes in the soil. He also has 12 children, all of which are thriving in body and mind. And if any of you know anything about Weston Price and having many children and nutrient deficiency that you can even see in them, there's something that this family is doing absolutely right. So I believe that what Todd Vincent is going to share with us today is really nothing short of the simple way forward for everyone and every country. So let's just get straight to it on the Ben Stewart Podcast. And here we are. Todd.
Hey,
man, how you doing today?
Doing good. How you guys doing?
Doing great.
Doing pretty well. Gordon over here pressing buttons. Let me ask you, man. Yesterday, or no, it was a few days ago, I was trying to get a hold of you, and you were like, "Oh yeah, I was on the tractor all day." What does a day in the life for Todd Vincent look like?
Oh wow, that's interesting. So, and I think it caters to my personality, but it's very eclectic. When you have a farm with not just one crop or one kind of animal, but many, the days are varied. So this morning, actually, me and the crew spent some time chasing sheep, fixing the fence that they ripped through. And then I did a farm tour after that. And then after this call, I'm probably going to be tying new red raspberry cane onto a trellis. So every day is kind of like that. It's something new at every moment.
I love it. I love it. For the audience to really understand, when we talk about regenerative agriculture, what does that refer to? And I mean, I believe that what you're doing is deeper than just the average regenerative agriculture, which is beautiful across the board. But let's just start with that. What is regenerative agriculture?
So I guess one of the easiest ways for me to describe it is where organic certified farming allows you to only use certain kinds of things, or you can't use certain kind of things. Regenerative farming is you're adding back. And so, that's the problem I'm having with even the word sustainable. Like, that's great, sustainable, if we were starting out with really good soil, but we're not.
Yeah,
so just to be sustainable to me is not enough. You actually have to put back into the soil and build that. And we should be seeing, season to season improvements on our crops, on our animals, and on our farms. And so to me, regenerative agriculture is just that. It's partnering with the earth, working with it to add back to it.
Partnering with the earth. I love that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some of the things that come to my mind when it comes to partnering with the earth, first and foremost, I guess what I see a lot in the old style farming is thinking that we know better. And I don't think it's impossible that we can improve upon nature. I believe that you're actually doing this, but this idea that it feels like partnering with the land sounds a lot like listening to it and first understanding it, coming to understand it by listening first, rather than just getting in there with the old practices.
Yeah.
And a lot of things come to mind, like, one, we talked, I mentioned in the intro, the microbes, and I want to get into that. But we have insects, we have pollinators, we have, what we would call good or bad insects. And I don't even know if that term really means exactly what most people think it is. Like, some insects are just bad across the board and some are just great across the board. And then we have diversity of animals, and then we have the practices that are seen on the land. So what if we can like find a fundamental philosophy that you daily go into your farm with, partnering with the land, what does that actually entail?
So I think you hit it right off the bat there. It's about being aware and observing. And so unfortunately in this country, or not even this country, farming globally, unfortunately, has gotten to where it's super mechanized and very disconnected. And one example, as consumers come out here and we do tours, and I'm always excited that people get excited to get out of the city and come to the country, and I love that. But I kind of am getting disappointed on just how excited people get. For instance, when I hand someone a chicken to hold, live hen, or I reach under the chicken and pull out a fresh egg that they've just laid, the people just get like so enamored by that and so surprised by that. And I got to thinking one day, I'm like, wow, we are so disconnected from where food comes from that people are enamored about holding a chicken. This was not, 50 years ago, this was not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a farmer, if you're just in a tractor or you're running a farm and you're not walking that and touching your animals and being amongst them at some point, you just can't notice what's going on. And so with weather patterns and just the way that biology is, it's always evolving. And so if you're not a part of that, you miss out on things. And so what I've had the privilege to be able to do is spend some time in nature. And I notice, for instance, years that elderberries do really great, wild elderberry trees, the sumac don't do so well. The sumac trees, not the poison sumac. And vice versa. And so it's interesting to see how nature compensates itself. And when one thing is suffering, something else is usually giving off abundantly. And so I always take that as cues for my animals and cues for my health. That's probably what we should be consuming at that time. Mm. And so I think for me, it's really about being aware and immersing yourself into the land and the animals. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on so many critical things that just can't be taught in a book. There is a lot of great books on natural farming and regenerative farming, and they're great as a starting point. But until you're out there doing it, there's not any farm, there's none that are the same. Soils are always different, and you've got to really immerse yourself and be in it to understand it.
Mm. Yeah, one of the first things I think of is, so I have a lot of friends that they have this plan that when shit hits the fan and they're sure that it's going to hit the fan, that at that point they're going to run to the closest plot of land, or they're going to use their backyard and they're going to start growing and they're going to start, basically homesteading. And I'm curious, for one, like, how long have you been doing this? And how long do you feel like it took for you to really get your feet wet and understand what you were doing?
So I'm on year 16 of farming. And wow, I would say the first 10 years was a lot of fails. But I mean, fails that I learned a lot and was able to move forward on. Yeah. And even today, like, I'm ever learning. And so what I encourage people is like, yes, that's great that you want to homestead and you want to have to take care of yourself when you have to take care of yourself. Right. But I always encourage people, start now. Start, whether it's one house plant that's producing something for you, get your feet wet now before things do get bad, so that you aren't so behind that 8 ball trying to catch up.
Yeah. And I feel that as well. And, so one thing we actually mentioned right before you got on was I was asking like how the day was, and you said the rain didn't hit you that hard, so that was good. It just brings up you said it's eclectic on a farm. There's every single day is different. So let's say you would just think, if you're not doing this too much, you would say rain is good, and getting a lot of rain must be really good. And hearing that from you, it causes me to acknowledge that there, not only, I was actually just listening to this podcast right beforehand about regenerative agriculture, and a couple people were mentioning about that, about saying like sometimes the biggest problem is too much rain. And I think the guy was from Kansas. He was like, people were like, well, what's it like in Kansas? He said it's like a desert that floods a lot. And yeah. I couldn't get my mind around that. Yeah. And he had also mentioned, he was just like, I know that every 8 days back in the day, we would have consistent rain, and every now and then there would be a year where it would be off. And then lately, the rains are coming and going in more odd patterns. So like the first thing I want to ask is, are you noticing any difference with like rain patterns or those kinds of things? And we're not even like diving into climate change. I'm just wondering, as a farmer, are these kinds of inputs like rain and sunshine, are they changing at all? And how do you have to adapt? Like what is your protocol to not freak out thinking that the entire crop's going to fail? Because I'm sure you must have those moments.
Sure. No, absolutely. And I don't know that I even have the experience or time put in yet to even know if I can track that, my weather patterns that I've had throughout farming. Because when you're new at jumping into farming, and before I started farming 16 years ago, I had never grown anything. So everything was new to me, and I jumped in hard. And so even though weather was happening, I wasn't always paying attention to it like I do today. And so I feel like I'm just in the last 5 years really watching the weather. And I'll say one thing about this particular winter here in Middle Tennessee. We had 3 to 4 measurable snows on the ground. Now, some of them were only there for 24 hours, but that's rare. That hasn't been like that since I've lived in Tennessee for 12 years almost. And I've never had that much snow that many times stay on the ground as long as it did this winter. And for me, snow is good. It does bring some nutrition to the soil. It's a great way to let water into the soil slower. So I wasn't really angry about it, other than I'd like it warmer, but yeah.
Okay. So I want to drill down on the one thing that I've found most fascinating. There's 2 things, and I'll save the first thing that I mentioned for later. We can talk about it, which is you were drinking out of a mason jar this tea that you would have, and it was from specific. Oh, you got it right there. With what is that called? The bombia?
Yeah, it would be a tea filter straw.
Yeah.
When you do yerba mate, they drink out of these.
Yeah. And so like, well, I mean, that's the perfect example. Like, what's in that jar right there? And explain the process of getting to that point.
So in this particular jar, marigold petals that we grew here, the dandelions that grow right now that are coming up, all the flowering dandelion heads. There is some pine needles in here. There is some apple leaves. There's papaya leaves, mesquite leaves, some oak leaves, and what else did I put in there? That's probably it in this one.
And so then there's the process. You collect it yourself, right?
Yep.
And you do it right before brewing it. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I do a couple different things. You know how I love fermenting things as well. So I'll take fresh leaves and kind of grind them up, and then do a hot water steep and drink that tea just like that. And then some I'll take and do a 7-day to 10-day fermentation process, let them ferment, bring them out, and I'll either dry them or even use them wet fermented and put them into this tea and have as well.
And the one part that I like the most about it is when you were mentioning it the first time to me, you were saying like, and I don't rinse it off, if there's pollen on it, that's supposed to be there.
Absolutely.
And I mean, what that feels to me before I drive down to the point I wanted, or the question I wanted to get to, is it's full spectrum nature. You're not rinsing it off. You're not getting rid of things because you've already created the environment where whatever's on there is going to be clean and you want in your body anyway.
That's right.
And so like the pollen being on these leaves, and you go around, you pluck it right beforehand, or you do the ferment, which puts it through a process that I want to get to. Yeah. It feels like this full spectrum part of nature, which is doing two things. For one, it's respecting what nature would already do, and it's also respecting the fact that there may be something to this connection that is even beyond your concept. Maybe you've read about it, oh, leave the pollen on it, and you have like an intellectual concept, but it's also like respecting that nature probably intended for it this way. And so, like, what do you notice with that brew? Like, you know, what do you notice, and also, like, what is it high in?
Yep. Okay. So it's a great question. So oftentimes when I'm out walking and picking things, what I'm doing is noticing, like we were talking about earlier, and I'm noticing what crops are doing really well at the time of year that I'm out foraging. And so right now, some of these leaves I had saved, you know, obviously, but some of them are fresh. The dandelions are coming up now. The pine needles are in full spring growth right now, so they've got a really good flavor, deep flavor. And then other things I saved back that I harvested, you know, in the fall or last summer even. And I just know that the closer we can eat to the way nature, the way the earth gives it to us, historically has been the safest way to eat. And when I say safe, I mean safe from bad pathogens and safe for our health to actually gain instead of be destroyed. And so when I'm eating foods, like even during the year on some of the annual crops that we grow, when I pick a radish, I may dust it off. I may not. But the most I would do is dust that off and then put it in my mouth, because I know the concept of microbes that are important are present there. And so I just know what that's doing inside of my own gut biome and love consuming like that. And when I do consume like this tea, for instance, there's something about this tea that's very calming. It's funny. My wife will oftentimes ask me in the morning, like, hey, did you have your tea yet? And that's usually if I'm acting maybe not so nice or whatever. And I'm like, no, I haven't had it yet. She's like, yeah, go drink your tea first, then we'll talk. So there's, for whatever reason, and I don't know the science behind what's in there that's calming, but I do know what's in there as far as an antioxidant. Tree leaves are very, very high in antiviral, antimicrobial components. And so when you break those down with fermentation and or even a hot water steep, like making tea, it releases a lot of that. Trees are also known to be very mineral dense. And so the mineral density doesn't get damaged with the hot water steeping, and it is extracted as well. And so I know that I'm consuming probably the broadest spectrum of absorbable minerals that I can, and way more effective than even buying those same minerals and taking them in pill form. I just like to go out and get them in nature.
Yeah, and the what am I trying to say? The allergies, like what it seems like that would help with is also seasonal allergies, because you're getting it from the pollen and you're drinking it and you're consuming it in its most natural form. Does that help you notice?
Yes, absolutely. And so I have never really had a huge allergy issue, but my wife does. And she used to be one of the people that dreaded spring coming on because, oh, here it goes, her nose, her sneezing, her breathing. And I would say in the last 3 years, she has very little allergic reactions in the spring, not even close to like it was when I first met her. And so I know that that's living out amongst it. It's consuming all its components, and it's finally really paying off in her health.
For sure.
Awesome.
So the fermented farmer is what you've been called as well. And we get some ferments from you, and I love what we've talked about when it comes to that. Actually, maybe we should even mention when I came to you for advice saying that maybe I might be hitting Africa at some point this year. And I have a close friend who just went to Africa, and he had some sleeper cell parasite. He believes he got it in Africa, but it did nothing to him until I think a year later, or maybe close to a year later, when he had some duck, and that it triggered something that hospitalized him. So without going deep on that, when I was asking you, like, hey, I don't want this to befall me, what should I do? What was your answer?
So I love history, and I love farming based on history and food production based on historical ways of producing food. But so that's where I went. When you told me that story, in Africa, I think it was still in the 70s they were doing this. When you would go there, whatever region you were going to, you were typically given a yogurt type drink. A masse is kind of, I think, what they called it. And that was basically cultured dairy from the area, and it's an open air culture. So it's getting cultured from bacteria that's naturally in the air there, and that would inoculate your system for the area that you were going to. And of course, that's not done anymore. And something that I recommended to you, like, hey man, as soon as you get there, wherever you're going, go to some locals and get whatever fermented item that they typically eat there. And that's going to be your protection. That's going to give you the inoculant you need to fight off any bad parasites that may be in that area.
So would you say, if I were to just ask for like one tip, like out of, people today in, whether it be city dwellers or whatever, with the average standard American diet, what have you, what would you say is like the one thing that we'd be missing the most, or the one thing that we could implement into our diets that would probably have across the board the healthiest impact? Would it be ferments?
So in my opinion, yes and no. Yes, because it's a great way to bring good biology to your gut. So my number one thing would be, you need gut biology, and that can come in the form of fermentation. And so what I love about our biome and our system and the bacteria in it, it mirrors the bacteria that should be present in healthy soil. So as a farmer, I know that when I don't have microbes that are actively working in my soil, that none of the nutrition is getting divvied up to the plants. So it's the microbes in the soil that do all the communication and start divvying up nutrition. It's the same thing in our gut. Our gut biome and the microbes there, when they are colonized properly and you have the right varieties and they're being fed, they are what takes care of us health-wise. And so there's multiple studies from a lot of different arenas on this, but the medical world is definitely realizing how important microbes are in our gut, and how many different ones there are. They're still discovering them even today.
Yeah, I even heard the mycobiome, like the mycology in our gut, helps with the microbes.
Yes.
And I would assume that's the same in the soil.
Absolutely.
Because everything you just said about the microbes in the soil reminded me of what I'd learned about mycelium in the soil. There has to be some kind of synergistic relationship there. I would love to know then a little bit more about your farm specifically, some points that actually, in my brother-in-law, Ruben, who the audience would know because we recently had him on the week after, it was the last week in February, talking about Ukraine, Russia. And I know you just met him, but he said when he came back, you have this 6-year projection about your topsoil. Yeah, I would love to hear that. And I would also love to hear what's the average for a farm as far as topsoil.
So topsoil averages are very varying across the globe, and it really depends, where you're at and the damage that's been done. And I will say this, as a farmer, I believe farming is played a big role in destroying climate and or the earth, but I also believe that farming itself can completely fix all of that.
Wow.
And when I look at topsoil and you hear folklore, you hear things about people being able to drive rebar into the ground 6-8 feet by hand. We don't have that soil anymore. We're lucky if we have inches or less of topsoil. And topsoil is where all the life is. Topsoil is where the microbes live and do all of their divvying up of water and nutrients. And so we are getting ready to start it's a 7-year program, but the first 6 years of this program, we are doing a mixed species grazing. And so a lot of people do mixed species, but we're taking it to a little farther than most. So we've got cows, we've got water buffalo, goats, and sheep all grazing together in the same paddock and get moved every day, and sometimes multiple times a day. And they're followed by a group of totaling 3,000 ducks, chickens, and turkeys. And then they're followed by a cover crop that we put in with a no-till drill, so we're not disturbing the soil, and irrigation. And we're going to repeat this process probably 4 to 5 times per acre per year for the next 6 years. And we're hoping at the end of that 6 years, we haven't created inches, but feet of topsoil.
Wow.
And what's so tweaking about that is when you think about it, most of the knowledge that we have of, let's just say planting a tree. Everybody gets a tree on Arbor Day, and they plant a tree and they water it in, and they just basically walk away and go, okay, in 30, 40 years, you'll be big. I feel that we're going to change that narrative, because if we're planting things, superfoods and tree healing trees in soil that is feet thick of nutrient dense active microbes, I'm telling you, those trees are going to grow faster. They're going to grow bigger. The fruit's going to taste better. It's going to produce more. And we're going to change the way we think about certain plants, because they're going to grow so much better in the right environment.
Wow. I was just listening to this podcast. There was a guy that has I guess it's like a lot of grapevines, so a vineyard. And when he started introducing sheep around it, the sheep love the vines. And but he did some way where the sheep weren't ravaging it, but the sheep were allowed to access it a bit.
Yes.
And he said that it added something to the terroir of the wine, that blind taste studies found that the ones that had the sheep around it, even though they ate some of the grapes and they had a lower yield, the taste was of much higher quality in blind studies, blind tasting.
Wow.
And it just kind of reminds me of what you're talking about with multi-animal. And I want to understand something. When you said it's followed by the the birds,
Yep.
Do you literally mean in sequence, like first these animals, then
Yep.
the birds?
Correct.
So why that sequence?
Yeah, so there's some reason to that madness. One is the first group of ruminants, the sheep, the goats, the water buffalo, and the cows, they all have a little bit different makeup in their manure and their urine. They all graze differently. So goats are browsers, the sheep are more herbivores, and then the cattle are grazing off the grasses and the more tender foliage. So you're covering a lot of your bases, and they all have enzymes in their mouth that signal plant growth, which is kind of interesting. And so as they're grazing, it's also signaling for regrowth, whatever they're grazing. So when you put all of that together, that's quite a symphony of stuff going on in that field. And then you move that group, and then after you move that group, you bring in some birds Well, the birds are the same thing. They all eat differently. They work a field differently. Some scratch. Some, the ducks will actually take their bills and kind of drill little holes looking for grub worms, and that aerates your soil. And all of their poop is a little different nitrogen containing qualities. And so and they're also eating parasites. So fly larvae that's coming in, that's landing on the cow manure, for instance, as they hatch, these birds are eating all of that. So it's cleaning your pasture. And then when you move them on and you take and plant a good cover crop or some good perennial grasses that you might want to bring into this area, they have a head start because of all that biology out there. And then you give that time to grow up, and then you bring this process through again, do it again, and you just keep repeating this.
Yeah.
Is this a template that you feel
That's what I'm
like,
wondering. Like, was this trial and error? Like, it's a lot of mutual symbiotic, like synergy, but did you just, was this the trial and error?
No. So there's been a lot of people do aspects of this, and there's some really good, scientific based reasons, and there's some good data out there. So what we're doing is we're trying to take all of those methods and putting them together in one big movement. And we are tracking, we're working with the Rodale Institute, and they are tracking everything from water retention to soil microbes to carbon, atmospheric carbon sequestering, to how many different species are emerging plant-wise in the pasture. So we're going to be documenting all of this. And so when we get done, we hope to have a blueprint. Now, this blueprint, depending on where you're going to take this plan and go do something with it, you may have to tweak the type of animals you use culturally or something like that, but it should still be a backbone for a very solid way to produce topsoil. And not that I live and die by numbers and statistics, but there is a statistic out there it's from the UN actually, that the amount of topsoil that we have left is around 60 seasons left, 60 growing seasons left.
My goodness.
Yeah,
60 years. That's a global number. That's not just here. That's globally.
60 years left.
Yeah.
60 years
so,
right now too.
So, I mean, it sounds like we need solutions like this implemented more widespread than just, like obviously than, in Tennessee where we are. We need these kinds of solutions everywhere. And I've even heard like so what you can do on a farm is really, some of the plants are nitrogen fixing, some of them are carbon sequestering. There's a lot of intelligence that can be put into this. My question, I guess, is like, what do you, not even like what's the biggest holdup? Because I'm pretty sure that's education, and also maybe just like deep grooved patterns and behaviors within farmers, and then maybe some corporate, I don't know, guidelines or strangleholds. I'm not really sure, but I'm wondering to you, like, if this were something that we were to say, like, listen, this, we keep talking about the climate, we keep talking about these as being like global killers, the biggest problems on the planet. What do you see as the best way to put the best foot forward as far as global adoption, or at least regional adoption?
Yeah. So, wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So some of this is just going to be personal opinion, but it's going to be from some experiences. And I sat down with a large food distribution company that everyone would know if I said their name years ago when I was still farming in Illinois. And they wanted local organic produce to be sold through their system. And this was going to be a pilot. We were hoping for a broader rollout for farmers across the nation. So as we sit there, they're giving us kind of all their requirements. And they got to their insurance requirement. It was millions of dollars in insurance you had to have. And so already people were dropping out, all the farmers, they were like, well, I can't even afford, there's no way I can afford that. And then they had very strict guidelines on your tomatoes need to look like this, your peppers need to look like this, otherwise we won't accept it. And so I just remember standing up in the meeting and I said, we can probably stop right here, because you really don't want local organic farmers to supply food for you. Because if you did, there's a lot of changes that would have to happen and take place here. And so to me, they've made it very difficult because of the systems that are there to bring good food. It causes the farmer to have to manipulate his growing patterns to meet the industry's desired result. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so farmers have bent because, okay, if this is what I have to do, this is what I'll do. You have that going on, which is, in my opinion. And so really to see a difference, I guess I just go back to the consumer and say, look, to me, this is not going to be solved by governments. This is going to be solved by people that truly want to eat locally grown, well-grown food that is nutrient dense. And if you want that, you're going to be willing to spend the money and the time it takes to seek a farmer out and buy his food at a reasonable price. And in America, especially, we're used to cheap food. We just are. And so we also come up against that challenge a lot.
Well, since we're, bringing up solutions, will this be, governmental, what ways may we see the solution? I'm kind of curious on your thoughts. I'm sure inflation, what we're seeing today, inflation, it seems like at first glance, potentially it could push people towards solutions of again, growing their own food or connecting with local farmers. And I'm also sure that inflation will hit the prices of the farmers as well. Do you see within communities of farmers, because I know there's a lot of Amish around you and also a lot of farmers as well that you are connected with, in times let's say where, so I mentioned earlier on Waking Infinity on Monday, I did a whole spot on food shortages. My thoughts on that are how, I've heard a lot of people say that, if there are food shortages, the prices of the food that will be available would be astronomical, just out of the panic from the people who do have their hands on the food, wondering, do I sell this or do I hold on to it?
Right.
What do I know this is very hypothetical, but what are your thoughts on how your community would react or behave in a situation where it does look like a lot of shelves are barren? It does look like the products that still exist, the prices are going through the roof. Perhaps you've, brainstormed this, but what do you think happens to local farming? Does it kind of turn to a barter system, or is this a good buffer between the food shortages and all out panic?
Yeah. So I definitely think it could be a great buffer. But let me tell you what we experience as farmers. So as everyone else has this sense of, oh, maybe I should start preparing. So last year and this year, when we go to do bulk seed orders of different, crops, I've never seen so many seed companies, organic seed companies, be out of seed, sold out. And it's not a supply chain thing. It's a lot of people starting to think about it thing. So they order a bunch of seeds, but unfortunately, a large percent of those people never end up planting those seeds.
I wondered that.
Yeah, I know tons of people that just keep hanging on to them, or meant to plant a garden but didn't. So then it makes it very hard for us to even get what we need if you're not saving your own seed. And so, yeah, it's one of those things where it's definitely got some promise to it, and it's got some probably upside, but there is a flip side as things become hard to get.
I'm curious, this is kind of a beginner question. What is the shelf life on seeds? And do you have to go ahead.
Well, that depends on some things. So it depends what it is, and then it depends on, do you have refrigeration and or freezing? You can refrigerate or freeze seeds and get them to stay longer. Some, if you have a good dry environment with proper humidity control, they can last for years, maybe 10 years. But definitely it gets less and less germination rate each year that goes by. So if you've got 1,000 broccoli seeds that are really good, in 5 years, you might only have 100 or 200 broccoli seeds that are going to sprout.
Wow.
Right.
Dude.
Makes sense.
So this next question is something that I figured would be a fun question. And I'm thinking about it more, I think, well, let me just say it. If you were on a desert island and you had, let's say, 3 plants, only 3 plants, and you had to think of you don't know how long you're going to be there. That there's fresh water, but so you'll have the water to irrigate and feed the plants, but you need to take care of all your nutritional needs and then some. What would those 3 plants be?
Wow, that's a real easy one, Ben. Not really. 3 plants. All right. So if I could have, they would be trees. If I could have trees, they would definitely be trees. Okay. I would probably say a coconut bearing tree.
Interesting.
Because the fruit and the leaves of that are both edible and beneficial and bring water. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of water in the coconuts. I would say possibly even the cannabis plant. Mm-hmm. It's got edible wise, and the juice of the leaves and bud is very healing and very nutrient dense and contains things, there's terpenes and things that only exist in that plant that really are medicinal. And then probably, what would my other one be? Probably soursop or graviola. They're the same. People know them as 2 different names. That's another one that is just nutrient dense, amazing plant.
Well, I actually don't. I've heard maybe you mentioned soursop, but maybe just give me a little bit more info on that.
So tropical. It's a very tropical plant. Has a lot of neat studies about it, and it's very anti-tumoral, anti-cancer type of vibe to it.
Is it this fruit?
Yeah, the fruit and the leaves both have. There's data behind both of that.
It looks like a small jackfruit almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool looking. I didn't even know this existed.
Yeah. That's brilliant. And I'm glad you said 3 trees, because there's something interesting about trees that become an ecosystem for other things.
Yeah.
A tree isn't just really one plant. It seems like it creates a habitat for critters, for, many different things there as well.
Well, and there will be some that would argue that cannabis is not a tree, and it's not really, but it definitely can be considered. I have had some perpetually going for years, like a mid-level shrub. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's something that can keep going in the right climate kind of indefinitely.
Wait a minute. The hemp cannabis plant, it's more than just an annual?
Oh yeah, in the right environment, you can keep those going for quite a while.
Do they produce every year?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
I did not know that about it.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, well, you can take them in and out because they're light sensitive. You can take them in and out of producing bud and then going back dormant just with light alone, and bring them into seeding or pollen production if it's a male. Yeah.
Awesome. And there's definitely something about that plant where the textiles, the rope, that there was it Thomas Jefferson who had mentioned between, if I had the option to plant tobacco or hemp, it would be hemp because of what it does for the soil, remediates the soil.
Oh, it's an amazing. So that's real quick side note on that remediation. in the organic hemp and cannabis industry, it was very hard because you could have a field that was certified organic for 10, 15 years. And we saw this happen. Where you were growing other crops organically for all those years, then you plant hemp or cannabis on that, you harvest your harvest, make an extract out of it, and test that extract, and it's going to pop hot for pesticides. Because 10 years ago, somebody used pesticides on that field, and even though it was clean to soil testing, that plant is so good about extracting and cleaning that it would show up in the concentrate.
Wow. So I guess then that also kind of insinuates part of a solution is maybe you don't consume that plant, but if you plant it and allow it to do its job,
correct.
And then I don't know what you do with that plant afterwards, like burn it or whatever. I don't know if that's a good idea either.
No, so they're doing some of this, and this is just from reading about it. Obviously, I haven't been there, but actually in Chernobyl, and even in Fukushima, I hear they're using the cannabis strain to remediate soil around those sites.
I heard of that, and I'd also heard mycelium has the ability,
Yes.
and some mushroom strains have the ability to remediate, radiation,
Yes.
ionizing radiation.
Yep.
They're also using it in this video. They're using hemp now to possibly replace concrete.
Yes,
because you can break it down.
Really cool.
Hempcrete.
Well, the Ellora caves and the Merovingian, so Ellora caves in India, I think that's like 500, maybe a lot older, 500 years ago, as well as the Merovingian bridge in France made from hempcrete that stands the test of time, especially in the humidity and the heat of India, better than any other kind of concrete. Ellora, Elora, I think is the name of the caves where they kind of use it around the outside. And that's just truly fascinating. But like, I love that we got into the remediation of the soil and talking about that, because we do come from in the past 150 years, maybe not even that long, when we started using World War II chemicals in the soil.
Yeah.
It's something that those chickens have come home to roost, to use a certain metaphor.
Yeah, no, they have.
While we're on the topic, because we mentioned mycelium, what are some of, and have you worked with, for one, there's a two-pronged question, have you worked with mushrooms and sporing and growing mushrooms? And with that, what are the ones that you like to have on hand for like medicine or a broad spectrum of uses?
Yeah, I would say my two favorite medicinal mushrooms personally are chaga, which is a tree form mushroom, and lion's mane.
Ooh.
And those two are just really, I think, powerful. They taste amazing. You can make great things with them as well. And I've not grown chaga. I have harvested chaga wild, but I have grown lion's mane. You grow that on wood as well, on wood fiber. And it's amazing. Easy to do. I mean, there's a lot of cool companies online that you can buy grow kits, and grow them in a bag. And that's a great way to get your feet wet in the world of mushrooms.
It looks really beautiful too. This is one of the most pretty mushrooms. It looks like a waterfall.
That's lion's mane?
Yeah. I've never looked at it like this. Yeah.
I've heard and it even has this signature to it that lion's mane is a nootropic, and it helps with neural activity. As well as chaga.
Does it help with lungs too? Or maybe
lion's mane?
I know, like mushroom tea, that was a big thing. You were drinking mushroom tea when I was at Gaia, and I know you're saying it helped with like lungs as well. I thought
there's a few of them. I can't remember now.
Maybe I'm getting confused. I don't know.
Cordyceps are good. And what's interesting, all these functional mushrooms, like you mentioned chaga, and chaga, the melanin count in it is incredible in the way that it helps repair DNA, and especially the DNA that gets damaged from Wi-Fi radiation, the non-ionizing radiation.
Oh, nice.
I'm sure it probably has some of the same effects for DNA repair for ionizing radiation. And there's just something about chaga Well, there's something about mushrooms in general that have, like we were saying earlier, such a symbiotic relationship. If you have, some good functional mushrooms and a healthy diet. By the way, turkey tail is really good for your microbiome as well. Yeah, there's just something really beautiful here and the reason why I'm mentioning these, and I want to get specific plants, is because a lot of people are, as I said, I have people connecting with me quite often saying like, what's the best layman's way to get into what we see coming in the world? And, a lot of the times it's just the things that I have off the top of my head that I share with them. But it's also like, really like look for superfoods that have good shelf life if you want to like store and stock up on some food. I mean, I think algae and some of the phytoplanktons, they've survived longer than anything else on this planet. So they're really nutrient dense. But also there's just this beautiful relationship between plant life and fungi. And so there's something there that I believe a lot of people should at least be aware of. With that being said, as we're wrapping up on this, I want to ask you, for you as somebody who works on the land and you work with these plants and you have some time with it, what are some of the beneficial unintended consequences of farm work? I would say some of the things that surprised you about becoming a farmer that laterally translated into different parts of your life that maybe gave you a benefit somewhere else.
Well, and not to knock anyone that is sitting at a desk every day. I hope that you're at least working out at some point if you are doing that. But it really gave me, it's active. I'm active. I'm up. I'm down. I'm crawling. I'm straining in different ways. There's a lot of motion that takes place when you are working with nature. Even from walking, you're walking the terrain, you're stepping over creeks and ditches. And so for me, I enjoy going out and coming in at the end of the day, feeling like I did something. I'm tired. I feel it. And it helps you get great sleep, which a lot of people don't get a lot of great sleep. So personally, for me, it was really great to be able to immerse myself in that, in all the connectivity. So I feel like I'm getting the benefit of the clean air being out here while I'm outside. I feel like I'm getting the benefit of having to move around in positions that if I was sitting at a desk, I would probably never be in. Yet they're good for me. And then just knowing that I'm getting soil microbes on my skin, in my mouth, constantly, because that relationship I feel that we're supposed to have, that relationship with the soil.
Did you work corporate at any point in your life, like before this?
I did. I had a friend and I had an IT-based company that we had guys that would travel around and install fiber optic cabling across the country. And so I was a desk jockey for 8 years doing that. And then from there jumped into farming, which was interesting.
Well, I love it. And I love that it stuck.
Installing
the farming stuck.
Organic optics.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm also wondering, like, what was it really difficult change of pace from the corporate desk jockey world to the farm? Were there moments where you're like, what the hell have I gotten myself into?
Oh, yeah. And those were basically, I remember Dad coming to visit. I sold the company, started the farm, and my dad shows up and looks at me and goes, "What in the hell are you doing?" And I'm just looking at him like, farming? And he meant like, "No, you've lost your mind." And so it took about 4 visits, and he was standing with Carrie, my wife, on the porch, and I was out in the garden with the kids, and we were going to town getting ready for a farmer's market that we were going to, and my dad said to her, "I get what he's doing. I finally get this, and I want to help."
Beautiful.
And so he came alongside and helped me with some equipment and things, and so he saw that first he thought I was crazy, but now I kind of see what you're doing. You're working with your family. You're getting outside. You're producing things. And he got into it, and so that was always kind of neat.
That's a really good point you mentioned. You're working with your family. So we didn't get into this, and we won't go deep in it. But you have 12 children.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a feat in and of itself.
Especially in today's day. Wow, respect.
and I've met them, and they're all incredible. And I mean, like, my God, super fit as well.
Many hands, light work.
Like, because you said 16 years, you'd only started having kids maybe 5-6 years before that, before you got out of the IT job, right?
Correct.
So, I mean, I guess there couldn't be like too much of I guess the question that I'm driving at is, like, does this work that you're doing, does it have this fulfillment where you're, relating to your family in a, we get to get our hands dirty together, we get to walk around the farm together, where we're also, like, not just raising them and telling them how to behave inside the house, but it's also they're, for one, getting the microbes in them, probably protecting them from allergies down the line, but also just getting that hard work that is rewarding by the end of the day. Like, do you think that would have been possible in your IT job?
No, and I look back, and this is just kind of how my family would be with the size it is. I look back and I think, wow, if I was working the job that I had, being gone all day, coming back for a few hours at night, and then leaving early again the next morning, very little contact with my kids. And not only that, I don't know what I guess we would have to put them in all kinds of things to keep them busy. Otherwise, they tear the house up. So now, and I'm going to tell you, and Ben, you know this, you've been here. My kids complain about having to work, and they have their days, and I don't want to have to go collect the eggs, and I don't want to do this. But it's really cool because I have such a broad spectrum now. From my oldest is 24 and my youngest is 4. And the older ones now talk about all the stuff that they had to do on the farm.
Yeah.
And they love it. And what's that?
Oh, back in my day,
12 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
The seniority now.
No, they just talk, and all their friends love all the stories they're able to share. And so they're very appreciative now, what they had to go through at a young age.
I love that. I love that.
I'd love to show the audience a little bit of what you've built too, with the ranch project here. And you've teamed up with Ancient Nutrition as well, which is a cool company. I've become more familiar with this video. I think this is, is this on your farm they came to?
Yeah, so all of that video was shot here on the farm.
Beautiful. We can kind of talk over it if we want, but this just gives the audience a little glimpse. And immediately in the back here, how many, let me pause right here. How many greenhouses, are those all greenhouses? How many do you have in the back there?
Yeah, so we had a total of 81 greenhouses here.
Wow.
And that is when we were basically in the hemp world, growing hemp for seed genetics. And in one winter, though, we lost 75 greenhouses to an ice storm and high winds all in one night.
Wow.
Man.
Yeah. And so we are taking trash to treasure, though. We're taking the broken down greenhouses, and we're going to still use them. And instead of having plastic on all of the uprights, we're going to let vining plants grow up those ribs and create truly greenhouses with plants.
And so that'll help. That'll help with winds and other certain weather things. Exactly. So
absolutely.
Exactly.
And this could be like a whole nother show, but I believe, and I think there's data to support this, when you're farming regeneratively like this, you're creating a microclimate right where you're at. Right. And there's a 90-acre farm in, I believe, Saudi Arabia. There's a YouTube video of some guys that went in, took 11 years. They took a desert piece of property, got with the locals, They said, yeah, there used to be trees here and grasses, and we grazed goats here. I mean, it just looked like desert, nothing.
Right.
And they spent 11 years, and they used to get 2 inches of rain a year there. And on this 90-acre piece now, they get over 3 inches of rain, but just on that 90 acres.
That's
and
incredible.
When you look at a satellite view, it's brown, 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 and then all of a sudden a square green piece. And so these are small examples of the reality of what we can do to really change what's happening.
Yeah. Design is so important.
That's
Yes.
just incredible. I mean, that's you know, it's funny to use this terminology, but like that's positive climate change. You know, like creating a microclimate and everything, because I've seen a video, and it might have been the same group that did it. They made swales in the desert.
Yep.
So some plants were grown on the shady side that work well in shade, and in, you know, the other side they could take more wind and sun. And in that, the way that the water worked through it, it was just intelligently designed, and it created rain right there.
Yep.
That's incredible.
And we see that all over happening. And so, you know, every day, the mundane tasks that I might have to go through, I always keep in the back of my mind what's really happening here. Like, literally, we're creating a climate right here.
Right.
That's incredible. And when you're talking feet of topsoil, I'm curious. I know that biodynamic farming, a lot of it is like according to the lunar cycle, and then you go out and you basically spreading microbes from cow dung.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yep.
So like I'm just curious because like
regenerative food for it. I love that term.
You know, yeah, with one handful of really dense microbial soil, you could potentially intelligently go somewhere else and inoculate a place, and if you feed it correctly, those microbes will proliferate. And
Absolutely.
I just see so much potential here, and you know, we're gonna have to do this again. We're gonna have to go deeper into some of these topics, because we just scratched the surface, and the audience listening really appreciates it too. You know, blowing our minds, and a lot of good input.
People need to see proof of concept now more than ever. You know, they really do, Todd. It's so important, because there's a lot of fear in the media, and there's a lot of divisiveness. So when people see proof of concept, when they see people walking the walk and not talking about it, but being about it, it shows them, okay, he can do it, I can do this. You know, this can be done. So it's huge. It's huge.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Gordon. Like, I always want to share with people what I'm doing here on this acreage can be done in your neighborhood, in your yard. Literally. I don't mean you need to get water buffalo roaming through the neighborhood, but there are some things that you can do in your yard that starts changing the soil, that starts changing the climate right there.
Makes sense.
Wow.
You can create your own ecosystem anywhere.
It does, and it really. I mean, what you just said right there, it places a lot of the responsibility back where it lies. You know, not like looking around like, Todd, well, then save us. You know, make the blueprint, spread it around the world so I can be saved. Obviously, there's a lot of education, and yes, you know, the support and the guidance needs to be there. But the fact that anyone who does own, like right here, I'm on 1 acre, and so much could be done. And it does kind of bother me that there's a lot of HOAs where you can't make a food garden. You know, like, no, it has to be grass because it has to look uniform.
Yeah, can't even have a chicken.
Right. And so, I mean, yes, there are these limitations, but not having a hyper focus on the limitations and then just looking at, well, what can be done? And a lot can be done with very little.
And it can be a this and approach, right? You can be doing what's allowed while saying, hey, we as a people are maybe some of these regulations and laws maybe not reasonable and based on good intent, but bad, you know, policy ultimately.
Yeah,
totally. I've seen wall gardens. People like, well, I have a wall that gets a hell of a lot of sun.
Yeah.
So I place planters on the wall, and I get to use all of that real estate. And you do it intelligently enough, you know exactly how much soil you need. You know what amendments you may need to work with. You're not going to have a mycelial blanket that's connecting them all, but you know, like, you start where you can.
That's right.
And then rooftop gardens I've seen, window gardens.
Right. That's what I was thinking too. I'm curious too for your thoughts on just more urban farming. Like we have, there's shipping containers, there's vertical farming, there's new urban approaches where you can have sort of little small, like in South Central, the famous gardener he was going around creating gardening in South Central, the gangster gardener. He's an amazing guy. But how do you see regenerative farming applying to more urban places?
So all of those, I think they're all great. I don't think there's any one method that's better than the other, whether it's hydroponics. I mean, it's got its place. But here's the one thing that I'll give as something that I'm doing here and reaping the benefits of is the cloth pots. And so they're kind of made out of felt. They're heavy duty with handles on them. You can get them in various sizes. I started using them a few years ago, and I'm telling you what, that is, if you got a container garden or you've got just a patio or a small space, get cloth grow bags and grow in them. It is amazing how well things grow in that. And here's why. In a plastic growing container, as the roots grow, they go in a circle around that plastic and just bunch up. And it really inhibits the plant from doing what it needs to do. In these cloth grow bags, the roots hit the sides of the bags, go outside of the bag, and then when they hit the air, they prune themselves. Well, that pruning signals to the plant, hey, make more root follicles. So they'll throw out more roots, and this process just continues. And I've taken plants out of these grow bags, and there's hardly any soil left. It's just a massive, beautiful web of roots, so that when you water that or you give that nutrition, that plant responds to it immediately.
Right.
And so I'm a big proponent of grow bags, if you can't tell.
That's incredible.
So it's these kind of fabric grow bags you're referring to?
Yep.
Yes, and you can get them in all different colors and sizes. Yeah.
Awesome. I wonder if they're made out of hemp too.
There is some companies doing it out of hemp. Yes.
The first place that I saw that was in Northern California, where a lot of the cannabis growing is using a lot of those grow bags.
That's an interesting point. The cannabis industry has really been cutting edge in a lot of our gardening tweaking. They've done so much of it, and now we're benefiting, from their knowledge of what they found out.
Down.
Yeah.
Actual trickle down.
Yeah. The real trickle down.
Trickle down gardening, not fucking economic.
Yo, Todd, this has been amazing, and I really do have to as much as I know you and we've had these conversations, there's still a lot of integrating I need to do. There's such good points here that it already brought up some more questions that I think we can dive deep into next time we have you on the program. Okay. I just want to say thank you for your time. I know you're a very busy man. You got to please send love to the family.
I will do it.
And is there any last tidbit or words of wisdom that you want to leave with the audience, or a way that they can connect with you or anything like that?
Yes. I think the last tidbit would be this. I would just want to always encourage people, if you can, and a lot of people are saying this, if you can spend 15 to 20 minutes in nature daily, it's going to change your life.
Wow.
Definitely.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, man. And thank you for your time. It's so good to chat with you in this forum as well.
Yeah, I love it, bro. Thank you.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a really, really powerful, just look at the comments there. It's been a very powerful moment, very practical. And also it should elicit this understanding that we are nature, that our environment is a part of us. And the more we respond to that, I think the one thing that I gained a lot from this that Todd was saying was really, listening to the land, engaging with it, being a part of it. Is we're not supposed to just be spectators. Nature wants our involvement. It wants us to connect and touch. So please take that to heart. Go back and listen through this again and take some of those tips and write them down, because I too believe that out of all the things I talk about and Gordon and I get into on this podcast, This is the most practical, and it's something that we can all do. And it's old fashioned. It's not just a brand new technique to add. So please take that to heart. And as always, thank you all for coming, being a part of this podcast as it's growing. I love all the comments. You guys are super mature, tuned in, and really engaged. I love that. We do this every single Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And with that being said, I just want to say I love all of your involvement. I love the fact that this is growing alongside and with the help of all of you. So keep sending me your emails, keep commenting, and I will catch you all next time on the Ben Stewart Podcast.